Today, I want to tell you about the most fascinating Arab American family that you've never heard of. This is Arab New York. If you happen to be flipping the pages of Vogue, The New Yorker, or Harper's Bazaar in the early 1900s, you probably are familiar with her work. Maria Azeez El-Khoury, also known as the Mother of Emeralds, was an incredible jewelry designer that was really popular, as popular as Tiffany & Co. and Cartier in the early 1900s. But let's flash back a few years and see how this Syrian immigrant made her way to Vogue over 100 years ago. When Marie was 9 years old, she immigrated with her family from Mount Lebanon to New York, where she went to high school and then eventually to college in Washington, D.C., where it's said to be that she was the first Arab American woman to graduate from college in the United States, and only at 17 years old, which is insane. Before her entrance into the jewelry business, Marie's dream was to be a freelance writer, which she did. She wrote articles for the Arab American magazine Al-Huda in Arabic, and she was the director of a magazine called Al-Mustahsan, which there's no record of online or anywhere, but is said to have been successful for a few years. When Marie was 22, which is as old as I am right now, her father passed away, and she inherited the jewelry business that he had from him. It was called the Little Shop of Tea Azeez, and at the time it was in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And she inherited the jewelry business that was mostly destroyed in a fire in 1904. That's a young age to inherit a business, let alone a destroyed business, but she turned it around. She moved it to Fifth Avenue, where Barnes & Noble is right now in Times Square, if you're familiar, and she later moved it to Park Avenue, which means her store housed two of New York's fanciest big-name brand streets. According to the Khairallah Center for Lebanese Diaspora Studies, Marie revolutionized jewelry design through the customization and personalization of gems, and she was known for setting trends. One of the trends she set, chokers. Yes, the chokers we wear to this day, or to a few years ago. She set that trend, and she said, too often jewels are worn as a style of the day and not for the color and style best suited for the individual. She rejected trends and insisted on individuality. Her pieces were highly sought after, and the New York Times called them a rendezvous for New York society women seeking jewelry of the finest design. She was a big deal. Here's the thing. Though Marie El-Khoury's jewelry was compared directly to Tiffany & Co. and Cartier, there are no known pieces of hers in museums or historical collections nowadays. There is no Little Shop of Tea Azeez in 2022 on Park Avenue. Her name doesn't echo on Fifth Avenue, and Arab women are still trying to make a name for themselves in the jewelry and fashion business, which feels like, but is clearly not, the first time. Marie was not just a jewelry designer. She was a woman of society. She hosted literary salons and dinners for a lot of Arab Americans in New York. She was known for her unusual dinners, inspired by gems. So her emerald dinners would carry the theme of emerald green, and she would serve dishes like split pea soup and pistachio ice cream. She did get married soon after college, but her husband, Asawi El-Khoury, died only 2 years after that. However, that was not the end of her love life, because she had an intimate relationship with none other than Gibran Khalil Gibran. In fact, they exchanged letters, and there's 33 letters that were sold in an auction a few years ago that were written from Gibran Khalil Gibran to Marie. He said, "I'm yearning for the golden corner that is filled with quiet and silence, and now I stole an hour from my friends and came to a room to be alone and talk to you, to revive my spirit with ideas and dreams that swim around my head when I sit alone and think of you." They had a very romantic relationship. And Mayir Rihani of the University of Maryland, also the niece of Amin Rihani, said that Gibran and Khoury had an intimate relationship. They met in the US when Khoury decided to organize dinner parties for Lebanese American intellectuals. Marie was also the aunt of Philip Azeez, a highly celebrated Canadian artist who died more recently in 2009. She was one of his closest and most influential people on his career, introducing him to high society people in New York and taking him on trips in the Middle East and Europe. He has a series of sketches inspired by his jewelry making aunt who lived in New York, and she was responsible for enrolling him in Yale. And when he was doing his Bachelor of Fine Arts, she told him that if he got high honors, he'll take him on a grand tour of Europe. He says he was 2 points behind, but she still took him on the trip. Marie's sister, however, was a special kind of character. We could call her quirky, but she was very interesting, and she started lecturing on the manners of customs of what was called Arabs and Mohammedans, which one can only assume means Muslims, of the Syrian desert in New York churches in 1892. She was featured in a lot of newspapers where people were writing about her, and they were very impressed by how good her English was, as she had learned in British schools in Syria. She would appear in native Syrian dress and play Syrian airs on the piano when she was only 16. The most interesting part about her is she went on the road claiming to be a Syrian princess by the name of Fanitza Abdussultana Nalid, which, as an Arabic speaker, does not feel very Arabic, but it sounded nothing like her name, and she said that she had been living in seclusion in Brooklyn, although she wasn't the quietest character when she was living in Brooklyn. A lot of the headlines for the newspapers she was featured on say that she was fluent in 7 languages: Arabic, Assyrian, Grecian, Latin, French, German, and English. And she was actually very talented when it came to fashion design, so fabric design. She took out a patent for a fabric design in 1898, which was very remarkable for someone at such a young age. One of the interesting things she said is when her father was still alive and running his shop in Atlantic City, she said that she wanted to build a monument for her father. She was also supposedly enrolled at Harvard, but there's not really any proof that she went to Harvard, so it could be another one of her interesting stories. One of the reporters that interviewed her said that there are very few women of her age that can do more things to make money or do them better. And she supposedly had written a book about a Syrian girl's life in America, and she imported hundreds of Syrian plants to the New York Botanical Garden. When she was still telling crazy stories, she said that her cousin was the richest man in Beirut, and like her sister, she also wanted to start a magazine, but we also don't know if that came to fruition. But when she grew a bit older, she became a landscape painter, and she was living with her mom and her sister, Marie, in New York. One can only imagine how iconic and interesting this family was at the time. And even to this day, if this family existed in 2022, they would be all over the news. And they were, especially Alice was on the news a lot for her interesting the things she was saying, and Marie was on the news for her jewelry. She was on so many issues of Vogue and Harper's Bazaar. But yet again, there's no museum, there's no museum pieces, there's no exhibitions. I've never heard of them until I found them online, and I was in shock of all the things I was finding out about them. And, you know, just the fact that there's no little shop of Azeez now, but there is a Tiffany & Co. and a Cartier and all these big fashion name brands that have been around for hundreds of years. So again, that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to tell you about Arab New York of the past, and just hidden stories. I'm really interested in finding more hidden stories that have to do with Arabs in general, but since I'm here in New York, Arab New York. If there's any interesting stories you think would be good for me to talk about, even things happening now especially, that I would be interested in talking about as a journalist, please let me know, and stay tuned for my next video.